"Why did you come for Christmas?" my daughter said. "You always make everyone feel uneasy." The first time my daughter told me I made everyone feel uneasy, I was holding a plate of cookies I had baked from a recipe my mother gave me in 1982 that I had driven 14 hours through a winter storm. My truck had no heat. I had stopped twice to scrape ice off the windshield with a credit card. I had packed the cookies in a tin box wrapped in a dish towel, so they wouldn't break. I had saved for 3 months to buy the ingredients. Butter was expensive. Chocolate chips were a luxury. But I wanted my grandchildren to taste something from my hands. Something that said Grandma was here. Grandma remembered. Grandma loved them even when she wasn't invited. Sarah opened the door and did not step aside. She looked at the tin box in my hands like it contained something she had to dispose of. Her eyes moved past my face to the street behind me. "Checking for witnesses. Mom," she said. "I didn't think you'd actually come." The wind hit my back and I leaned forward into it. My knees ached. They always ached after driving. I had arthritis in both hands, but I had wrapped the cookies anyway, because that was what you did. That was what Robert would have done. He would have driven through a hurricane for his grandchildren. "You called me," I said. "You said Christmas was at your house this year." Sarah let out a small breath. She was 41 now. She had her father's jawline and my stubborn chin. She wore a sweater that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Her hair was cut in a way that required appointments and money and time. "Mom, I called you because Daniel's mother was coming and I don't know what I thought. I thought maybe it was time to try again." "Try what?" "Try having you around without everything getting heavy." That was when I heard Gloria's voice from inside the house. Gloria was Daniel's mother. She had never liked me. She had never liked that I was a waitress, that I had no degree, that I wore shoes from thrift stores and drove a truck that people pointed at in parking lots. She was a retired accountant with a condo in Florida and a way of smiling that made me feel like I had food on my face. "Sarah," Gloria called. "Is that your mother? Tell her to come in before the draft kills us." Sarah stepped aside. I walked into the house with my tin box of cookies. The house was beautiful. It was the kind of house you see in magazines, where every piece of furniture has a purpose and nothing is out of place. The tree in the living room was tall and perfectly symmetrical. The lights were white and even. The ornaments were glass and matched the color scheme of beige and gold. That I remembered the tree we had when Sarah was little. Robert and I bought it from a lot on the corner of Oak Street. It was lopsided and dropped needles everywhere. Sarah hung paper ornaments she made in kindergarten, and they were all I wanted to see. That tree was a mess, but it was ours. This tree was perfect, and it belonged to someone else. The grandchildren were in the den. I heard them before I saw them. They were 6 and 8, and they had not seen me in 15 months. I had sent birthday cards. I had sent Christmas presents. I had called and left voicemails that nobody returned. But I had not seen them. That I walked toward the sound of their voices. "Mimi," Daniel said from the kitchen doorway. He said it the way you say a word you are testing to see if it tastes bad. I stopped. Sarah had told me they didn't use that name anymore. They called me Eleanor now, because Mimi sounded too old, too grandmotherly, too something. I set the tin box on the kitchen counter. Daniel was standing beside Gloria, and Gloria was holding a glass of red wine like it was a prop in a play. She wore silk pajamas that were probably meant for sleeping, but she had chosen them for hosting. She looked at my coat, my boots, my hair that was gray and thin and had not been cut in 6 months because I couldn't justify the expense. "Eleanor," Gloria said, "you look tired." That was her way. She never insulted you directly. She said things that could be compliments if you were deaf and generous. The grandchildren came into the kitchen. The boy, Miles, was 8 and had Daniel's wary eyes. The girl, Ava, was 6 and had Sarah's smile. They both looked at me like I was a stranger who had wandered in off the street. "Hi, Mimi," I said, because I had been their Mimi for 6 years, and I wasn't going to stop now. Ava looked at her mother. "Can we have cookies?" I opened the tin box. The cookies were perfect. I had baked them the night before, in my tiny kitchen, with my arthritis singing in my hands. They were chocolate chip, the ones Robert had loved. The ones Sarah had eaten by the dozen when she was Ava's age. "Those look wonderful," Gloria said, and something in her voice made my back straighten. I handed a cookie to Ava. She took it and ate it. Miles took one and ate it too. For one moment the kitchen was quiet. They were chewing my cookies and I felt the only thing I had ever felt that mattered. I was useful. I was a grandmother. I had hands that made things. Then Daniel said, "Mom, maybe we should wait for dinner." And Sarah said, "Yes, Mom, it's almost dinner. Put the cookies away." I closed the tin box. The dinner was formal. Sarah had prepared roast beef and vegetables arranged in rows. The table was set with cloth napkins and silverware that had been polished. Gloria was seated at the head of the table because Daniel had given her that seat. I was seated next to Ava, which I appreciated. But the conversation was stiff. Daniel talked about his job at his father's development company. Gloria talked about her bridge club and her vacation plans. Sarah nodded and smiled and refilled glasses. And then Gloria turned to me. "Eleanor," she said, "Sarah tells me you retired. What do you do with yourself all day?" I swallowed my bite of potato. "I garden. I take care of the house. I read." "Read what?" "Whatever the library has." Gloria nodded like that was the saddest answer she had ever heard. "You should come stay with us in Florida sometime. The sun is good for older people. We have a community pool. There are activities." She said it like she was offering me a gift, but I knew what it was. It was a box. She wanted me in a box. She wanted me in Florida, in a retirement community, with other women who had been put in boxes. "I like my house," I said. "Robert built it. I'm not leaving." The table went silent. That was when Sarah said it. She said it into her wine glass like she was confessing something small, something insignificant, something that would just float away. "Mom, you always make everyone feel uneasy." I looked at her. She did not look back. "You don't laugh at the right times," she continued. "You stand in the kitchen and just stare out the window. You don't talk about fun things. You always bring up Dad or money or something sad. It brings the mood down." Gloria reached across the table and touched Sarah's hand. She was comforting her. Gloria was comforting the woman who had just told her mother she was unwanted. "I just want you to try to be different," Sarah said. "Can you try for the kids?" I looked at the grandchildren. They were staring at their plates. They had heard everything. They had understood everything. Ava was poking her roast beef with a fork and not eating. Miles was watching me with his father's wary eyes that I had driven 14 hours. My truck had no heat. My hands hurt. I had spent my last $20 on cookie ingredients. And I had just been told I was too heavy to sit at the table, that I stood up. I picked up the tin box of cookies from the counter. "I'll go," I said. Sarah grabbed my wrist. Her grip was tight. She was 30 years younger and I could not pull away. "Mom, don't make it a thing. Just try. Just be lighter. Can't you just be lighter?" I pulled my wrist free. "I hope Ava and Miles never know what it feels like," I said, "to be told they make people uneasy." I walked to the door. I put on my coat and my boots. The grandchildren were still in the kitchen. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Because if I looked back, I would start crying, and crying would prove her right. I was heavy. I was sad. I was everything she couldn't carry. The cold air hit me as I walked to my truck. The cookies were still in my hand. The tin box was warm from my grip. I opened the door, got in, and sat there. The engine wouldn't start. I had left the lights on. The battery was dead. I was stuck in her driveway in a truck that wouldn't run, with a tin box of cookies nobody wanted, and the Christmas lights on the house next door were blinking in a rhythm that made my head hurt. I sat there for a long time. The windows fogged up from my breath. I wiped them with my sleeve. The cookies were still warm. I opened the tin box and took one out and ate it. Tasted good. It tasted like everything I had ever done right. And then I saw Sarah in the window. She was looking out at me. She didn't come outside. She didn't wave. She just stood there with her wine glass and watched me sit in a dead truck on Christmas Eve. I started the engine by rocking the truck and popping the clutch. It worked. Robert had taught me that. Robert had taught me everything that kept me alive. I drove to a motel off the highway. The room had a bed and a lamp and a Bible in the drawer. The heat didn't work. I slept in my coat and cried into the pillow until I stopped feeling my face. At 3 in the morning, I took out Robert's photograph from my wallet. He was young in the picture. He had his arm around me. We were laughing at something I couldn't remember. His eyes were blue and steady. He used to tell me that nothing was ever as bad as it seemed, and if it was, you just had to keep moving. I moved to the bathroom. I turned on the light. I looked at my reflection. My face was red and swollen. My hair was flat. My eyes were small and wet and angry. I was 62 years old. And I had just been told I made my daughter uneasy. But I wasn't going to disappear. I had never disappeared. I had raised a child alone. I had buried a husband. I had worked jobs that broke my body. I had survived 19 years without the only man I ever loved. I could survive this. I would survive this. And maybe, I could do more than survive. The bell on the motel desk rang. It was just a desk bell, meant for checkouts and wake-up calls. But I rang it anyway. I rang it because Robert used to ring a bell at the hardware store when he won a bid. He said it was his victory bell. He said everybody should have one. I rang it once. And in the sound, I heard something I hadn't heard in 19 years. A plan. Not revenge. Not anger. A plan to build something so big that my daughter's house would feel small. I just didn't know yet what I would build. I didn't know who would help me. I didn't know if I had the strength. But I knew one thing. I was not going to be light. I was not going to be easier to carry. I was going to grow roots so deep nobody could pull me out. The motel room was cold. The bed was hard. The tin box of cookies sat on the nightstand. And I was alone in a strange town on Christmas morning. But for the first time in 19 years, I was not afraid of being alone. I was afraid of what I was about to become. Because it was bigger than me. And it was coming. Comment. I'm not going anywhere. If you've ever been told you're too much. Bell. The next part is where everything changes. You don't want to miss it. Subscribe now so you're here when Eleanor meets Grace. It happens at a diner. And it changes everything. The motel room smelled like bleach and old carpet. I woke up with my coat still on, my boots still laced, and a stiffness in my neck that told me I had slept badly. The clock on the nightstand said 7:03. Christmas morning. I had spent Christmas morning in worse places. A hospital room in 2004, holding Robert's hand while the machines beeped slower and slower. A rental kitchen in 2008. Making pancakes for Sarah while she cried because she had broken up with a boy who didn't deserve her. A parking lot in 2015, sleeping in my truck because I couldn't afford the heating bill. This was just another morning. The sun was coming up. The world was still turning. And I was still breathing. I took a shower that ran cold after 4 minutes. I brushed my teeth with my finger. I looked at the tin box of cookies and decided I would not leave them behind. They were good cookies. Somebody would eat them. The truck started on the second try. I drove to a diner I had seen on the way in, just off the highway, with a sign that said Grace's in faded red letters. The parking lot was empty except for one car, an old sedan with a cracked windshield and a bumper sticker that said, I brake for gardens. I walked in. The air smelled like coffee and bacon and something sweet I couldn't identify. The diner was small, maybe 12 tables, with red vinyl booths and a counter with stools that had seen better decades. A woman was standing behind the counter. She was older than me, maybe 75, maybe older. Her hair was white and cut close to her head. Her hands were thick and knobby, the hands of someone who had worked with them. She wore a stained apron over a blue dress that had patches on the elbows. She looked at me. I looked at her, then she said, You look like someone who's been asked to leave more than once. I didn't know what to say. I stood there with my tin box of cookies and my wet hair and my eyes that were still puffy from crying. She reached under the counter and pulled out a small ceramic bell. It was chipped and faded, the color of old bone. She rang it once. The sound was thin and cracked, like it had been used so many times that it had forgotten what a real bell sounded like. That was my grandmother's, she said. She brought it from Ireland. She used to say that every time you ring a bell, you call back the part of yourself you lost. I set the tin box on the counter. I don't think I lost any part of myself, I said. I think I just had it taken. The woman studied me. Her eyes were sharp, the kind of sharp that comes from watching people for 50 years. Sit down, she said. I'll make you coffee. And whatever's in that tin box, I'll trade you for a plate of eggs. Her name was Grace. She had owned the diner for 40 years. Her husband died in 1995 from a heart attack at the dinner table. She had found him with his face in his soup. Her son ran away at 17, and she hadn't heard from him in 32 years. She had a dog named Beans who was asleep under the counter, and a persistent cough that she waved away like it was a fly. She put a plate of eggs and toast in front of me and poured coffee into a mug that had a chip on the rim. "Where are you headed?" she asked, and I shrugged. "I don't know. I don't have anywhere to go." She nodded like this was a perfectly normal answer. "Then stay. I need help in the kitchen. The girl who works weekends quit 2 weeks ago. I'll pay you under the table, and you can sleep in the back room until you figure out what you're doing." I looked at her. "You don't know me." "I know you make good cookies," she said. She had opened the tin box and was eating one. "Anybody who makes chocolate chip cookies that good is worth keeping around." I cried again. It was the 3rd time in 24 hours. I had not cried that many times since Robert died. But I cried because she said something simple and kind. And I had not heard something simple and kind in a very long time. Grace walked around the counter and put her hand on my shoulder. Her fingers were rough and warm. "Here's the thing," she said. "People like us, we get told we're too much, too heavy, too sad, too hard to be around. But you know what that means? It means we feel things more than other people. It means we love harder and we hurt harder, and we don't let go. That's not a weakness, Eleanor. That's the only thing that's worth anything." She picked up the bell and rang it again. This time the sound was less thin. It had a little more depth, a little more shaped. "Eat your eggs," she said. "Then we'll work." I stayed. I didn't plan to. I didn't have a plan. But Grace put an apron on me and handed me a bucket of potatoes and told me to peel them. I peeled potatoes for 3 hours. Then I washed dishes. Then I wiped down the counters. Then I took out the garbage. By the end of the day, my hands were raw and my back ached, and I felt more alive than I had in years. Grace sat at the counter after we closed. She had a cup of tea and beans was in her lap. "So," she said, "you want to tell me about your daughter?" I told her everything. I told her about Sarah. I told her about Daniel and Gloria. I told her about the Christmas dinner and the comment that had cut me open and left me bleeding on a motel pillow. Grace listened without interrupting. When I finished, she reached under the counter and pulled out a small leather pouch. She opened it and took out a single seed. "This is from my grandmother's garden," she said. "It's an heirloom tomato. They don't make seeds like this anymore. They're stubborn. They need good soil and patience. But when they grow, they're the most beautiful thing you've ever seen." She put the seed in my palm. "Your daughter is wrong," she said. "You don't make people uneasy. You make them see what they don't want to see. That's a gift. It's just a hard one to carry." I closed my fist around the seed. "What do I do with it?" I asked. Grace smiled. It was a slow smile, like she had been waiting for that question for a long time. "You grow it," she said. "And while you're growing it, you figure out what else you want to grow." The next week was ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. I worked the diner from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. I washed dishes, served coffee, and learned the regulars. There was Frank, a man in his 50s who had lost his trucking job and came in every day for the same meal. There was Rosa, a woman who was losing her vision and came in for tea and company. There was Trina, a young mother who worked the night shift at a factory and brought her kids for pancakes on Saturdays. They all had stories. They all had losses. They all had reasons to give up. And none of them did. I started to learn their names. I started to learn their orders. I started to feel like I was part of something. Not a family. Something else. Tribe maybe. A tribe of people who had been told they were too much and had decided to be too much together. Grace had a garden behind the diner. It was small and overgrown. She told me it used to be beautiful, but she hadn't had the energy to tend it for years. I looked at it and remembered the seed in my pocket. "I want to build something," I said one morning. "I want to build a garden that takes up space, that no one can ignore." Grace nodded slowly. She was drinking her tea at the counter. Beans was asleep under her stool. "There's a community garden by the railroad tracks," she said. "It's been abandoned for years. The city owns it. They're thinking of selling it to a developer." "Who?" "Marcus Cole." She said the name like it tasted bad. "He owns half of downtown. He's the one who's been trying to buy up every piece of land he can get his hands on. He wants to build a parking garage." I went still. Marcus Cole is Sarah's father-in-law. Grace looked at me. Her eyes were sharp again. "Well," she said, "this just got interesting." I went to the garden that afternoon. It was worse than I expected. The fence was falling down. The soil was full of broken glass and old tires. The weeds were taller than me in some places. But I could see it. I could see what it could be. I stood in the middle of the plot, and I turned around in a circle. I could see rows of vegetables. I could see benches. I could see a greenhouse. I could see children running through it, learning where food comes from. I could see Sarah's grandchildren. My grandchildren. I could see them there, even if Sarah never brought them. I could see everything. I went back to Grace and told her what I wanted to do. She didn't say much. She just nodded and pulled out the bell from behind the counter. She rang it once. Then let's get to work. She said that the first week of work was the hardest. I had to clear the land. I had to pull out the weeds. I had to collect all the glass and all the tires and all the garbage that had been dumped there. People noticed. They stopped and watched. Some of them laughed. Some of them shook their heads. Some of them said I was wasting my time. But some of them stopped and helped. Frank came. He was a big man with a quiet voice and hands that had held a steering wheel for 20 years. He didn't say much. He just started working. Rosa came. She couldn't see well, but she knelt down and touched the soil and told me what it needed. More lime. More compost. More patience. Trina came. She brought her kids and they painted a sign that said, Eleanor's Garden. I didn't ask for help. I didn't even want it at first. I was used to doing things alone. I had been doing things alone for 19 years. But they came anyway. And I let them. One night, I was sitting on the diner steps after closing. The sky was clear. The stars were out. I could see the garden from where I sat, even in the dark. It was nothing yet. It was just a patch of cleared earth. But it was mine. Grace came out and sat beside me. She had beans in her lap and the bell in her hand. Your daughter called today, she said. I told her you were busy. I turned to look at her. What did she want? She wanted to know if you were coming back for Christmas. She said they were having a party on New Year's Eve, and you could come if you wanted. I didn't say anything. Grace rang the bell. It sounded better now. Fuller. Like it had been practicing. You know what your problem is, Eleanor, she asked. You still think you have to be invited. She stood up and walked back inside. I stayed on the steps, looking at the stars, thinking about what she said. I didn't need to be invited. I could build my own table. I could build my own feast. I could build my own family. And I didn't need anybody's permission. The next morning I got a letter from Sarah. It was in an envelope with a return address that made me feel like I was holding something that could cut me. I opened it in the diner. Before the breakfast rushed, it said, Mom, I'm sorry about Christmas. But you have to understand that you can't keep living in the past. Dad is gone. You need to move on. Daniel's father wants to buy your house. He's offering a fair price. You could use the money. Please think about it. We love you. We just want what's best for you. I read it 3 times. Marcus Cole wanted my house. The house Robert had built. The house I had raised Sarah in. The house where I had cried and laughed and survived. He wasn't just taking the garden. He was trying to take everything. Grace saw my face. What is it? She asked. I folded the letter and put it in my pocket. He's coming for my house, I said. But he doesn't know what he's up against. Grace smiled as she rang the bell. Then let's show him. The letter stayed in my pocket for 3 days. I folded it and unfolded it until the paper grew soft along the creases. I read it in the mornings before the diner opened. I read it in the evenings after the dishes were done. I read it so many times that I memorized every word, every comma, every careful lie wrapped in the shape of love. Marcus Cole wanted my house. He was using my daughter to get it. I thought about that house. I thought about Robert standing in the living room with a level in his hand, making sure the walls were straight. I thought about him on the roof in the summer, hammering in the heat, shirtless and sweating and laughing at something I had said. I thought about him falling off that roof in 2004, and the way the phone rang and the way my knees gave out before I even answered it. That house was the last thing he had built. Every nail, every board, every window frame had his hands on it. When I walked through the front door, I could still feel him there. In the kitchen, where he made pancakes on Sunday mornings. In the backyard, where he planted roses because I told him I liked the color red. In the bedroom, where we had held each other on nights when the world felt too big and too cruel. Marcus Cole wanted to buy it. He wanted to knock it down, probably. Put up something new and shiny and soulless. Erase everything Robert had left behind. That I was not going to let that happen. But I had no money. My pension barely covered my groceries. I had no savings, no assets, nothing except a truck that was falling apart, and a tin box of cookies that nobody wanted. I told Grace about the letter while I was wiping down the counter. She was drinking her tea and eating one of my cookies. He's offering me a fair price, I said. It's not fair. It's a fraction of what the property is worth. He knows I'm desperate. He knows Sarah's putting pressure on me. He's trying to squeeze me out. Grace set down her cookie. Are you going to sell? I looked at her. I'd rather burn it down. She smiled. It was a hard smile, the kind that said she had been through similar fights and come out the other side. Good, she said. Then don't sell. But you can't just say no. You have to build something so big that his offer becomes irrelevant. I thought about the garden. It was growing. Slowly, painfully. Frank had fixed the fence. Rosa had brought compost from her own garden. Trina had found a donation of seedlings from a local nursery. The tomato plant from Grace's seed was already a foot tall, dark green and stubborn, reaching toward the sun like it had something to prove. But it wasn't enough. A garden wasn't enough to stop a man like Marcus Cole. That I needed more. That night, I went to the library. It was a small building with yellowed windows and a sign that said closed, but the door was unlocked because nobody in that town bothered to lock anything. I found the section on urban farming and community development, and sat on the floor with a stack of books. That I read about grants. I read about nonprofits. I read about veterans programs and agricultural education, and funding opportunities for low-income communities. Robert had been a veteran. He never talked about it. He never wore his uniform or went to parades or joined organizations. But he had a folder in the bottom of his desk drawer that I had found after he died. It had his discharge papers, some commendations, and a letter from a colonel thanking him for his service. That I had kept that folder. I had never opened it after the first time. It was too painful, too final. But that night, I went back to my room above the laundromat. I pulled the folder out of my suitcase. I opened it. The papers were yellowed. The ink was faded. But I could still read them. Robert had served in a non-combat role. He had been a carpenter, building barracks and repairing equipment. He had been stationed overseas for 3 years. He had never mentioned any of it. But there was a letter in the folder from a veterans organization. It was dated 2001. It offered support for veterans pursuing entrepreneurship. It had a phone number. I looked at the number. It was 25 years old. There was no way it was still active. But I called it anyway. The line rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. I was about to hang up. A woman answered. Veterans Enterprise Fund. How can I help you? I told her about Robert. I told her about the folder. I told her about the garden and the house and Marcus Cole, and my daughter who had told me I made everyone uneasy. She listened. Then she said, I'm sorry, ma'am, but your husband passed away in 2004. You aren't a veteran. The fund is for veterans themselves, not their spouses. I felt the air leave my chest. I had been so stupid. I had been so hopeful. Of course the fund wasn't for me. Nothing was ever for me. However, the woman said, there is a program for surviving spouses of veterans. It's new. It started last year. It's small, but it exists. Let me transfer you. The line went silent. Then another voice came on. A man's voice, younger than the first. Hello, this is Mark. Tell me about your project. I told him everything. I told him about the garden, the diner, the community that was forming around us. I told him about the abandoned land and the developer who wanted to turn it into a parking garage. I told him about the seed from Grace's grandmother, and the tomato plant that was already taller than my knee. I didn't cry this time. I was past crying. I was past hoping. I was just speaking. Just telling the truth. Mark was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I want to see pictures. I want to see the garden and the diner and the community. If it's real, I can help you. I can't promise anything, but I can help. I didn't hang up. I held the phone and I listened to the silence on the other end, and I felt something shift in my chest. Something that wasn't hope, not yet. Something smaller. Something like a seed. The next day, I took pictures of the garden with my old flip phone. The photos were grainy and badly lit, but you could see the soil. You could see the fence Frank had fixed. You could see the sign Trina's kids had painted. You could see the tomato plant in the center. Reaching up like a fist, I sent them to Mark. He responded within an hour. I'm coming to see it in person, he said. Next week. I want to meet you. I want to meet the people who are helping you. I want to see if this is as real as it sounds. I told Grace about the call while we were closing up the diner. She didn't say much. She just reached under the counter and pulled out the bell. She rang it once. The sound was clear and true. It had healed the way I had healed. Slowly, stubbornly, through you. Eleanor, she said. I think you're going to win. I shook my head. I don't even know what winning looks like anymore. She leaned forward. Her eyes were as sharp as I had ever seen them. Winning isn't about beating Marcus Cole, she said. Winning is about building something he can't tear down. And you've already started. A few days later, Sarah called again. I answered this time, because I wanted to hear what she would say, because I needed to know if she was still my daughter or if she had become something else. Mom, she said. Did you think about the offer? I was in the garden. The sun was warm on my shoulders. The tomato plant was blooming. Small yellow flowers, too small to see from a distance, but I could see them up close. They were beautiful. I'm not selling, I said. Sarah sighed. It was a heavy sigh, like I had just told her I was giving up. Mom, Daniel's father is trying to help you. He knows you don't have a lot of money. He's offering you a good price. You could move to something smaller. You could be comfortable. I am comfortable, I said. I'm in a garden. I'm planting tomatoes. I'm working with people who don't think I make them uneasy. Sarah went silent. Mom, she said, and her voice was smaller now. I don't think you make us uneasy. I think I just don't know how to be around you. You're always so sad. You're always talking about Dad. It makes me feel like I wasn't enough for you. Like you would have been happier if he had lived and I had died. I closed my eyes. The sun was warm. The wind was moving through the weeds, through the flowers, through the leaves of the tomato plant. Sarah, I said. Your father loved you more than anything in the world. The only reason I survived after he died was because I had you. You were the only thing that made me get out of bed. You were the only thing that made me eat. You were the only thing that made me breathe. She started crying. I heard it through the phone. Then why were you always so sad? She asked. Why did it always feel like you were looking through me? I opened my eyes. I looked at the tomato plant. It was growing, reaching up, stubborn and strong. Because I was scared, I said. I was scared that if I let myself be happy, I would forget him. I was scared that if I moved on, it would mean I didn't love him anymore. I was scared that I would lose you too. Sarah was quiet. Mom, she said. I never wanted you to forget him. I just wanted you to see me. I sat down in the dirt. I didn't care that my jeans were getting stained. I sat down and I looked at the sky, and I let the wind blow through my hair. Sarah, I said. I see you. I always saw you. I just didn't know how to tell you. She laughed. It was a small, wet laugh. Mom, she said. I don't think you make us uneasy. I think you make us feel things we don't want to feel. That's not the same thing. I didn't know what to say. So I didn't say anything. And I let her come to me. I let her hear the silence. I let her sit in the quiet. Because sometimes the quiet was the only honest thing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like my daughter and I were talking in the same language. But the house was still at risk. Marcus Cole was still coming. And I still had no money. But I had the garden. I had Frank and Rosa and Trina. I had Grace and her Belle and her stubborn love. And I had a phone call with a man named Mark who was coming to see what I had built. The tomato plant was blooming. I touched a flower. It was fragile. It was small. It was the beginning of something that could be destroyed by a single storm. But it was still there. It was growing. It was reaching up, reaching out, reaching towards something I couldn't see yet. I rang Grace's bell. I carried it with me now in my apron pocket. I rang it once. And I promised myself that I would not stop until that garden was so big, so strong, so undeniable that nobody could ever take it away from me. And if Sarah came with me, that was good. And if she didn't, that was her choice. But I was going to build it anyway. I was going to build it for Robert. I was going to build it for Grace. I was going to build it for everyone who had ever been told they made people uneasy. And I was going to win. bell if you want to see what happens when Mark arrives and what he brings with him. Hit subscribe now. Part 4 is where everything changes. You don't want to miss it. Mark arrived on a Thursday. I knew he was coming because he called me from the highway and said he was 40 minutes out. I spent those 40 minutes pacing the garden, pulling weeds I had already pulled, rearranging the sign Trina's kids had painted, and trying to remember how to breathe. Grace came out to the garden with 2 cups of coffee. She handed me one and stood beside me, looking at the plot of land that had become the center of my world. You look like you're about to throw up, she said. I feel like I'm about to throw up. Good. That means you care. She didn't say anything else. She just stood there with me, drinking her coffee, waiting for the man who might change everything or change nothing. Mark's car was a sensible sedan, the kind a bureaucrat would drive. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with a clean-shaven face and glasses that made him look like a librarian. He stepped out of the car and looked at the garden. He looked at the fence Frank had fixed. He looked at the sign Trina's kids had painted. He looked at the rows of vegetables that were starting to push through the soil. Then he looked at me. Eleanor, he said, you have a real talent. I didn't know what to say. I had been called many things in my life. A hard worker, a good mother, a stubborn woman who wouldn't let go. But nobody had ever called me talented. I showed him everything. I showed him the tomato plant that had grown taller than my waist. I showed him the rows of carrots and onions and peppers. I showed him the compost pile Rosa had built, and the irrigation system Frank had rigged from old hoses. I showed him the bench Trina had painted with flowers and the birdhouse that Robert had made 20 years ago, which I had brought from my house and hung on a post. Mark walked through the garden slowly. He touched the leaves. He knelt down and felt the soil. He looked at the sunlight hitting the plants and the way the whole thing was laid out in careful, deliberate lines. Who designed this? He asked. I told him about Grace's grandmother's seed. I told him about Rosa and her knowledge of soil. I told him about Frank and his quiet, steady work. I told him about Trina and her kids and the way the whole community had come together without being asked. Mark stood up and brushed the dirt off his hands. This isn't a garden, he said. This is a movement. We went to the diner. Grace made us lunch. Beans sat under the table and watched us eat. Mark had a sandwich and a cup of coffee, and he asked me questions for 2 hours. Where did I see this going? What did I want to build? How many people would it serve? What was the long-term vision? I didn't have answers to most of the questions. I had never thought that far ahead. I had been so focused on surviving each day that I hadn't allowed myself to dream beyond the next season. But I told him what I felt. I told him about the Veterans Fund and the letter I had found in Robert's folder. I told him about the seed and the bell, and the way the garden had become something more than dirt and plants. I'm not trying to make money, I said. I'm trying to make a place where people like me can belong. Mark nodded. He took off his glasses and cleaned them on his shirt. When he put them back on, his eyes were softer. Eleanor, he said, I'm not going to lie to you. The fund I represent is small. We don't have millions of dollars. We don't have the kind of money that can compete with a developer like Marcus Cole. I felt my chest tighten. This was it. This was the end. He was going to say no, and everything I had built would crumble. But we do have something else, he continued. We have connections. We have a network of people who believe in exactly this kind of project. And I think I can help you find the resources you need, even if I can't give them to you myself. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. He opened it and spread papers across the table. There's a grant for community agriculture projects in underserved areas. It's competitive, but I think you'd be a strong candidate. There's also a matching program for veteran spouse initiatives. And there's a crowdfunding platform I know about that specializes in urban farming. I stared at the papers. They were covered in numbers and legal language and requirements I didn't understand. What do I have to do? I asked. Mark smiled. You have to apply. You have to be patient. And you have to keep doing what you're doing. Because this garden you've built, it's real. It's not a promise or a dream. It's actually happening. That's worth more than any grant. Grace gave Mark a slice of pie before he left. He ate it in 2 bites and said it was the best thing he'd had in years. Come back, I told him. When the tomatoes are ready, I'll make you a salad. He shook my hand. His grip was warm and steadied. I'll be back, he said. And I'm going to bring some people with me. People who might be able to help you in ways I can't. He drove away. I stood in the parking lot with Grace and watched his car disappear down the highway. Well, Grace said. That went better than I expected. I looked at her. What do you mean? She shrugged. Most people come here and they see an old woman and a scraggly garden, and they pat you on the head and leave. He saw something else. What did he see? She smiled and pulled out the bell. She rang it once and the sound was clear and bright. He saw a woman who's going to win. The next few weeks were a blur of work. I applied for the grant. I filled out forms I didn't understand. I called numbers and left messages and waited for responses. I spent every free hour in the garden, planting and weeding and watering. Frank came every day. He fixed the irrigation system and built a better fence. Rosa came every other day. She brought compost and herbs and stories about her grandmother's garden in Mexico. Trina came on weekends. She brought her kids and they helped me plant seeds and water the rows. The community was growing. Word was spreading. People started coming to the garden just to sit on the benches and watch the plants grow. They brought their own seeds. They brought their own stories. They brought their own losses and their own hopes. One afternoon, an older man came and stood at the gate. He had a cane and a quiet face and a shirt that said, Navy in faded letters. I heard about this place, he said. I served in Vietnam. I never talked about it. But I see what you're doing here, and I think I want to help. I gave him a trowel and a packet of carrot seeds. He knelt down in the dirt and planted a row. He didn't say much. But he came back the next day. And the day after that. I started calling him Tim. He didn't mind. Sarah called again. I answered because I was tired of running from her. Mom, she said. Daniel's father is getting impatient. He said he's going to make a formal offer through a lawyer if you don't respond soon. I was standing in the garden. The tomato plant had fruit now. Small green tomatoes, hard and bright. They would be ready in a few weeks. Tell him to make the offer, I said. I have a lawyer now too. Sarah was quiet. You have a lawyer? I smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. Grace knew a woman who does pro bono work for community projects. She's helping me. She says Marcus doesn't have a claim on the garden because it's city land and the council hasn't approved the sale yet. And she says my house is protected because Robert left it to me in a trust. He was smart that way. Sarah's voice was tight. Mom, you're really going to fight him? I'm not fighting him, I said. I'm just not lying down. Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I think I need to come see you. I think I need to see what you've built. I felt my throat tighten. Come, I said. I'll show you everything. I spent the next 2 days getting ready. I cleaned the garden. I swept the diner. I made a batch of cookies. I bought new sheets for my room above the laundromat. I didn't know why I was so nervous. Sarah was my daughter. I had changed her diapers. I had held her when she had nightmares. I had taught her to ride a bike and made her lunches and stayed up all night when she had a fever. But she had become a stranger. And I was afraid that no matter what I built, it wouldn't be enough to bring her back. Grace saw me pacing the garden on the morning Sarah was supposed to arrive. Stop it, she said. She's your daughter. She's not a judge. She's not Marcus Cole. She's a woman who grew up with you and she's trying to find her way back. I looked at the tomato plant. The green tomatoes were bigger now. They were almost ready. What if she doesn't like it? I asked. What if she looks at everything I've done, and she says it's not enough? Grace reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were rough and warmed. Then she's not ready yet, she said. But that doesn't mean you've failed. It just means she needs more time. I squeezed her hand, and if she is ready, I asked. Grace smiled. Then you won't just be building a garden. You'll be building a family. Sarah's car pulled up at noon. She was alone. No Daniel. No Gloria. No kids. Just her, standing in the parking lot of Grace's diner, looking at me like she didn't know what to say. I walked toward her. I didn't run. I didn't rush. I walked slowly, steadily, like I was walking through the garden I had built. Hi, Mom, she said. Hi, baby. I said. She started crying. I started crying. We stood there in the middle of the parking lot and we held each other. Mom, she said into my shoulder. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what I said. I'm so sorry for Christmas. I held her tighter. I know, I said. I know. She pulled back and looked at me. Her eyes were red and swollen. Will you show me the garden? I took her hand. Follow me, I said that I walked her through every row. I showed her the carrots and the onions and the peppers. I showed her the bench Trina had painted and the birdhouse Robert had made. I showed her the tomato plant with its hard green fruit, waiting to ripen. Sarah knelt down and touched the leaves. She touched the soil. She looked up at me. Mom, she said. You built all of this, I nodded. In 6 months, I nodded again. She stood up. She looked at me, really looked at me, like she was seeing me for the first time. Mom, she said. I'm so proud of you. I didn't know how to hear those words. They were so foreign, so unexpected. I had spent 19 years feeling invisible, feeling heavy, feeling like I was too much for everyone around me. And my daughter was looking at me like I was everything. I'm proud of you too. I said that, and for the first time in a long time, I meant it. That night, I rang Grace's bell in the garden. The sound carried across the rows of vegetables and through the fence and up into the sky. Sarah was standing beside me. She had stayed. She had called Daniel and told him she was staying the night. Mom, she said. What's the bell for? I smiled. It's for calling back the parts of yourself you lost. I said. Sarah was quiet. Then she reached out and took the bell from my hand. She rang it once. Then I need to ring it too, she said. I looked at her. She looked back at me. And in that moment, I understood something. My daughter hadn't lost anything. She had just forgotten where to find it. And I had built a garden that would show her the way. But Marcus Cole was still coming. And he wasn't going to stop. That night, I got a letter from his lawyer. It was a formal offer. Full price. With a deadline. If I didn't respond in 2 weeks, he would take me to court. I read the letter 3 times. Then I put it in my pocket and went back out to the garden. The tomatoes were almost ready. And so was I. A bell if you want to see how Eleanor fights back when Marcus Cole takes her to court. Subscribe now and don't miss part 5. This is where the battle really begins. The letter sat on the diner counter for 3 days. I read it every morning, every night, and every time I walked past it. The paper was crisp and expensive. The kind that came from a lawyer's office with mahogany desks and leather chairs. It smelled like money and threats. I showed it to Grace. She read it once and handed it back. 2 weeks, she said. He's not giving you much time. He's not giving me any time, I said. He's trying to scare me into selling. Grace was quiet. She was washing dishes, her hands moving through the soapy water with the practiced rhythm of someone who had done it for 40 years. Are you scared? She asked. I thought about it. I thought about Robert. I thought about the house he had built and the garden I had grown. I thought about Sarah who had come back to me, and the grandkids I hadn't seen in months. I thought about Frank and Rosa and Trina and Tim. I thought about the bell Grace had given me, the one that called back the parts of yourself you had lost. No, I said. I'm not scared. I'm angry. Grace smiled. It was a hard smile, the kind that said she understood. Good, she said. Angry is better. Angry keeps you moving. I called the lawyer Grace had found for me. Her name was Margaret. She was 72 years old, retired, and did pro bono work because she said she couldn't stand to see good people get pushed around by bad ones. She had white hair and thick glasses and a voice that sounded like gravel. She took Marcus Cole's letter and read it over the phone. Eleanor, she said, this is a standard intimidation tactic. He's trying to make you think you don't have a case. But you do. That land is city property. The sale hasn't been approved. And your house is protected by a trust. He can't touch either of them. What about the deadline? I asked. Deadlines are just words, she said. He can't take you to court in 2 weeks. The courts are backed up for months. He's bluffing. I felt something loosen in my chest. So I don't have to sell? You don't have to sell, she said. But you do have to be prepared. He's going to keep pushing. He's going to try to wear you down. He's going to use every trick in the book. I thought about Sarah. I thought about Daniel. I thought about Gloria and the way she smiled into her wine glass. I'm not going to wear down, I said. That Margaret laughed. It was a dry, rattling laugh. That I know you're not, she said. I've heard about you. The whole town has heard about you. They say you're the woman who built a garden on a garbage dump and made it bloom. That's not a woman who wears down. The next few days were hard. I worked the diner in the mornings and the garden in the afternoons. I had to keep going. I had to keep building. If I stopped, Marcus Cole would win. If I stopped, I would prove my daughter right. I was too heavy, too sad, too much. But I wasn't too heavy. I was exactly the weight I needed to be. Sarah came to the garden every day. She stayed for a week. She helped me plant and weed and water. She didn't know how to do any of it, but she learned. She asked questions. She got her hands dirty. Mom, she said one afternoon. I called Daniel. I told him I was staying another week. I looked up from the row of carrots I was weeding. What did he say? He wasn't happy, she said. But I don't care. I sat back on my heels. The sun was warm. The garden was green and growing. My daughter was standing in front of me with dirt on her knees and a determined look on her face. Sarah, I said. Why are you staying? She looked at me. Her eyes were wet. Because I want to remember who I am, she said. I've been so busy being Daniel's wife and Ava and Miles's mother and Gloria's daughter-in-law that I forgot I was your daughter too. I forgot I was Robert's daughter. I forgot I was the girl who used to eat cookies on the porch and climb trees in the backyard. I stood up. I walked over to her and took her hands. You never forgot, I said. You just got lost. We all get lost sometimes. She cried. I held her. The wind moved through the garden and the leaves rustled, and the bell on the gate rang softly. The grant application was due in 10 days. I worked on it every night after the diner closed. I wrote about the garden and the community and the people who had come together to build it. I wrote about Robert and his service and the folder I had found in his desk. I wrote about Grace and her grandmother's seed, and the bell that rang for everyone who had ever been told they were too much. I didn't know if it was good. I didn't know if it was what they were looking for. But it was honest. It was the truth. And I had learned that the truth was the only thing that had ever worked for me. Mark called every few days to check on my progress. He read drafts over the phone and gave me feedback. He told me to be specific. He told me to be emotional. He told me to be unapologetic. People don't give money to gardens, he said. They give money to stories. Tell them your story, Eleanor. Tell them the truth. So I did. Marcus Cole came to the diner on a Saturday. I was behind the counter, wiping down the coffee machine. Grace was in the kitchen. Beans was asleep under a table. The door opened. He walked in. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than everything I owned. His shoes were polished. His hair was perfect. He looked like a man who had never had to wonder where his next meal was coming from. He sat down at the counter. He looked at me. Eleanor, he said. We need to talk. I didn't stop wiping the coffee machine. I don't think we have anything to talk about, I said. He leaned forward. You're making a mistake. That land isn't worth what you think it is. The city is going to sell it eventually. You're just delaying the inevitable. I put down the cloth. I looked at him. I looked at his eyes, which were cold and hard and used to getting what they wanted. I'm not delaying anything, I said. I'm building something. And I'm not going to stop because you want to put a parking garage on top of it. He laughed. It was a short, sharp laugh. You think you can stop me? You're one woman with a garden and a few friends. I have money. I have lawyers. I have connections. I reached under the counter and pulled out the bell. I rang it once. The sound was clear and steady. Marcus, I said. You might have money and lawyers and connections, but you don't have this town. You don't have these people. You don't have a garden that grew out of nothing. You don't have a bell that calls people home. He stared at me. For a moment his mask slipped. I saw something behind his eyes. Not fear. Not anger. Something smaller. Something like doubt. You're making a mistake, he said again. No, I said. I'm making a choice. And I'm choosing to stay. Grace came out of the kitchen. She stood beside me. Marcus, she said. I think you should leave. He looked at her. He looked at me. He stood up and adjusted his jacket. This isn't over, he said. No, I said. It's not. But I'm not going anywhere. He walked out. The door swung shut behind him. I stood there with the bell in my hand, and Grace stood beside me with her hand on my shoulder. You did good, she said. That was the hardest part. standing up to him the first time. I looked at the bell. It was chipped and faded, but it was mine. Was it enough? I asked. Grace smiled. It's never enough the first time. But it's a start. And now he knows you won't back down. The next day, I found out that Marcus Cole had started a campaign against the garden. He went to the city council. He went to the local newspaper. He went to anyone who would listen and told them that the garden was a waste of land and that I was a stubborn old woman who was holding up progress, but something happened that he didn't expect. People started writing letters. People started showing up at the council meetings. People started speaking out. Frank spoke. Rosa spoke. Tim spoke. Trina spoke. Even her kids stood up and said they wanted to keep the garden. The newspaper ran a story. It wasn't about Marcus Cole. It was about me. It was about the garden. It was about the community that had grown around it. I read the article in the diner. Grace had saved a copy for me. Eleanor's garden, it said. The woman who built a movement on a patch of dirt. I felt something shift inside me. Something that wasn't hope. It was something bigger. Something that made me feel like I could stand up to anyone. Mark came back the next week. He brought 2 people with him. A woman named Jane who ran a foundation for community agriculture, and a man named David who specialized in legal defense for property disputes. They walked through the garden and asked me questions for hours. At the end of the day, Jane looked at me. Eleanor, she said, we want to help you. Not just with money, with everything. We want to make sure this garden stays here forever. I looked at the garden. I looked at the tomato plant with its green fruit. I looked at the rows of vegetables and the fence Frank had fixed and the sign Trina's kids had painted. Thank you, I said. But I need to do this myself. I need to know that I can do this myself. Jane smiled. That's exactly the answer I was hoping for. The deadline came and went. Marcus Cole's lawyer called Margaret. Margaret told him I wasn't selling. The lawyer threatened court. Margaret told him to go ahead. The court date was set for 3 months later. I had 3 months to prepare. 3 months to make sure that when I stood in front of a judge, I had everything I needed to win. I spent those months in the garden. I worked harder than I had ever worked. I planted more seeds. I fixed more fences. I built more benches. I turned that patch of land into something that looked like it had always been there. Sarah stayed. She didn't go back to Daniel. She called him and told him she was staying with me. Mom, she said one night. What if we lose? We were sitting on the bench in the garden. The tomato plant was full of fruit. Bright red tomatoes, heavy and ripe. I reached over and took her hand. Then we lose, I said. But we don't stop. We keep going. We keep planting. We keep building. Because losing once doesn't mean losing forever. Sarah was quiet. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. Then let's win. The court date arrived. I dressed in my best clothes. A blue dress that had been in my closet for years. A pair of shoes that were comfortable but not worn. I pinned Robert's wedding photograph to my collar. Grace rang the bell. She rang it 3 times. For luck, she said. I walked into the courthouse with Sarah by my side. Frank was there. Rosa was there. Trina was there. Tim was there. The whole town was there, it seemed, filling the small room with their presence. Marcus Cole was sitting at a table across the room. He had a team of lawyers. He had a briefcase full of documents. He had everything money could buy. I had a garden. I had a bell. And I had the truth. The judge called the case to order. Marcus Cole's lawyer stood up and began to speak. He talked about progress. He talked about revenue. He talked about the city's need for development. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I waited. When it was my turn, I walked to the front of the room. I didn't bring any papers. I didn't bring any witnesses. I just stood there and told the truth. I told the judge about Robert and the house he had built. I told him about Grace and her grandmother's seed. I told him about the garden that had grown from a patch of garbage. I told him about the people who had come together to build something real. Your Honor, I said, I'm not asking for anything that doesn't belong to me. I'm asking for the right to keep what I've built. I'm asking for the right to stay. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the bell. I rang it once. The sound was clear. It was bright. It filled the room. Marcus Cole's lawyer was silent. Marcus Cole himself was pale. The judge looked at me. He looked at the bell. He looked at the room full of people who had come to support me, and then he smiled. The judge was a man named Harlan. He was in his late 60s with a full head of white hair and a pair of reading glasses that sat low on his nose. He had been a judge for 32 years, and I could see in his face that he had heard every argument, every plea, every desperate attempt to win a case that should have been settled long before it reached a courtroom. He looked at me. He looked at the bell in my hand. Then he looked at Marcus Cole and his team of lawyers. Mr. Cole, the judge said, you're asking this court to remove a community garden that has been built by volunteers on land that the city has not yet approved for sale. You're asking me to evict a woman who has lived in her home for over 40 years, a home built by her late husband, a home that is protected by a trust, and you're asking me to do this so you can build a parking garage. Marcus Cole's lawyer stood up. His name was Harrison, and he had the polished look of a man who had never lost a case. Your Honor, Harrison said, my client has the legal right to develop that land. The city council is considering the sale. The garden is a temporary structure. It's not permanent. It's not protected. It's a hobby. I felt my hands tighten around the bell. A hobby. Everything I had built. Everything Grace had given me. Everything Frank and Rosa and Trina and Tim had poured their hearts into. A hobby. Judge Harlan looked at me. Mrs. Whitman, he said, do you have anything to say in response? I stepped forward. I had no papers. I had no witnesses. I had nothing except the bell and the photograph pinned to my collar. Your Honor, I said, that garden is not a hobby. It's a community. It's a place where people who have been told they don't matter can come and feel like they belong. It's a place where children learn where food comes from. It's a place where veterans like my husband can be remembered. It's a place where an old woman like me can find purpose. I stopped. I took a breath. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know all the legal terms. But I know that what I built is real. And I know that if you let Marcus Cole tear it down, you're telling everyone in this town that their work doesn't matter. That their stories don't matter. That they don't matter. The room was quiet. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. I could hear Frank shifting in his seat. I could hear Sarah holding her breath. Judge Harlan took off his glasses. He cleaned them on his robe. Mr. Harrison, he said, you said the garden is temporary. Can you prove that? Harrison hesitated. The fence is made of reclaimed wood, Your Honor. The benches are basic. The irrigation system is improvised. It's not a permanent structure. Judge Harlan nodded slowly. But the plants are permanent. The soil has been amended. The roots are in the ground. That sounds permanent to me. Harrison opened his mouth, but Judge Harlan held up his hand. I've been a judge for a long time, he said. I've seen a lot of cases like this. Powerful people trying to take something from someone who has less. And most of the time they succeed. Because most of the time, the person with less doesn't have the resources to fight back. He looked at me. But you, Mrs. Whitman, you did something different. You built something. You created something that people believe in. And that's not a legal argument. But it's a human one. And in my courtroom that matters. He turned to Marcus Cole. Mr. Cole, he said, the city council has not approved the sale of that land. Until they do, the garden stays. And even if they do approve it, I'm going to make sure that Mrs. Whitman has every opportunity to protect what she's built. This case is dismissed. Marcus Cole stood up. His face was red. Your Honor, he said. This is an outrage. I have investments. I have plans. I have. Judge Harlan cut him off. Mr. Cole, he said. You have a parking garage. Mrs. Whitman has a garden. In my opinion, she's already won the more important battle. This court is adjourned. The room erupted. Frank let out a whoop. Rosa started crying. Trina hugged her kids. Tim was clapping, his cane in his other hand. Sarah grabbed me. She hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. Mom, she said. You did it. You actually did it. I looked at the bell in my hand. I had rung it in the middle of the courtroom. It had echoed off the walls. It had made a sound that no one could ignore. I didn't do it alone, I said. We did it. Grace was standing in the back of the room. She was leaning against the wall with beans at her feet. She smiled at me and nodded. I walked over to her. The crowd parted around me. Grace, I said. What do I do now? She reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were warm and rough. You keep growing, she said. That's what you do. You keep growing. The weeks after the court case were different. I had won, but winning didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. The garden was bigger. More people came. More plants were planted. More seeds were saved. We built a greenhouse. We built a kitchen. We built a library of seeds from families who had passed them down for generations. I started cooking classes for single mothers. Rosa taught them. She couldn't see well, but she could taste. She could smell. She could touch the dough and know exactly what it needed. Frank built more benches. Tim started a veterans program. Trina started a market stall where kids could sell the vegetables they had grown. And I kept working. I worked every day. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. Sarah stayed. She called Daniel and told him she wasn't coming back. He was angry. He threatened to keep the kids away from her. She told him that she would fight him in court if she had to. I watched her on the phone. She was standing in the garden, her back straight, her voice steady. I'm not going to let you control me anymore, she said. I'm not going to let your mother control me. I'm not going to let my mother's sadness control me. I'm going to live my own life. She hung up. She turned to me. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. Mom, she said. I think I'm finally becoming who I'm supposed to be. I didn't say anything. I just opened my arms and held her. Grace's health started to decline that fall. She had always been tough. She had always waved away her cough. But now it was worse. She couldn't stand for long. She couldn't work the diner the way she used to. I took over the kitchen. I cooked breakfast and lunch. I served coffee and pie. I talked to the regulars and listened to their stories. Grace sat at the counter. She had her tea. She had beans. She had the bell. One night, after we closed, she called me over. Eleanor, she said. I need to tell you something. I sat down beside her. Beans was in her lap. The bell was in her hand. I'm not going to be here much longer, she said. I felt my chest tighten. Don't say that. She smiled. It was a soft smile, the kind that said she had already accepted what was coming. I'm not afraid, she said. I've had a good life. I've had this diner. I've had beans. I've had you. She reached out and put the bell in my hand. I want you to have this, she said. It's been in my family for 100 years. It's time for someone else to take care of it. I looked at the bell. It was chipped and faded, but it was still beautiful. Grace, I said. I can't take this. It's yours. She shook her head. It's yours now, she said. You're the one who made it sing again. I didn't argue. I couldn't argue. I just took the bell and held it. Grace died 3 weeks later. She died in her sleep with beans at her feet. Sarah found her when she came to open the diner. I didn't cry. Not at first. I was too numb. I had buried Robert 19 years ago. I thought I had used up all the tears I had. But when I went to the garden that night, I started crying. I sat on the bench in the middle of the rows, and I cried until I couldn't breathe. Sarah came and sat beside me. She put her arm around my shoulder. Mom, she said. She's at peace. I nodded, but I couldn't stop crying. She was the first person who didn't think I was too much, I said. She was the first person who looked at me and saw something worth keeping. Sarah squeezed my shoulder. She saw what I see, she said. A woman who never gives up. A woman who builds things. A woman who makes people feel like they belong. I held the bell. I didn't ring it. I just held it. The funeral was small. Grace had been a private person. She didn't have many friends. But the people who came were the people who mattered. Frank, Rosa, Trina, Tim, me, Sarah. We buried her in a plot near the garden. It was the only place she would have wanted to be. After the funeral, we had a meal at the diner. I cooked. That was how I dealt with grief. I cooked. I put my hands in flour and butter and sugar, and I made things that tasted like love. Sarah helped me. She was getting good at it. Mom, she said as she was kneading dough. What are you going to do with the diner? I looked around. The red vinyl booths. The counter. The coffee machine that had been there for 40 years. I'm going to keep it open, I said. For Grace. For all the people who need a place to feel welcome. Sarah nodded. She understood that winter, the garden was dormant. The plants had died back. The rows were covered in snow. But I knew they were still there. The roots were in the ground. They were waiting. I walked through the garden every day. Even when it was cold. Even when the snow was deep. I walked through the rows and I remembered what Grace had said about the seed, that they were stubborn. They needed good soil and patience. But when they grew, they were the most beautiful thing you'd ever seen. I had good soil now. I had patience. And I was ready to grow again. Spring came. The garden came back to life. The tomato plant from Grace's seed was the first to bloom. It was taller than ever. It had more flowers than I had ever seen. I planted more seeds. I planted everything I had saved. I planted the carrots and the onions and the peppers. I planted the herbs Rosa had given me. I planted the flowers Trina had brought. The garden grew. It grew faster and bigger than I had ever imagined. And I was still here. I was still building. I was still growing. I rang the bell. It was clear and bright. I had lost so much. Robert. Grace. The years I had spent feeling invisible. But I had gained so much. The garden. The community. My daughter. Myself. I rang the bell again. And this time, I wasn't calling back anything I had lost. I was calling forward everything I had to give. Sarah moved into the house with me. She brought Ava and Miles. They stayed with me for the whole summer. Daniel tried to fight it, but Sarah had lawyers now. She had Margaret. She had a community. The kids ran through the garden. They picked tomatoes. They pulled carrots. They ate berries off the vines. They laughed. One day, Ava came up to me with a tomato in her hand. Mimi, she said. Can I plant a seed? I knelt down beside her. I took her hand and I showed her how to put it in the soil. Plant it deep enough so the birds can't get it. I said. And water it every day. And talk to it sometimes. They like that. Ava nodded. She planted her seed. She watered it. And I knew in that moment that everything I had built was going to last. The diner was full that summer. People came from other towns to see the garden, to eat the food, to ring the bell. I stood behind the counter, and I served them. I listened to their stories. I told them mine. And every night, after closing, I went to the garden and I rang the bell. I rang it for Grace. I rang it for Robert. I rang it for everyone who had ever been told they were too much. And I knew that the greatest revenge wasn't taking something from someone who hurt you. It was building something they could never touch. I had won the court case. I had built the garden. I had brought my daughter back. But the real victory, I realized, was just beginning. Because I wasn't done building. I wasn't done growing. I wasn't done showing the world that a woman who had been told she made people uneasy could make something beautiful. I had the bell. I had the seeds. I had the garden. And I had a community that would never let it fall apart. The tomatoes were ready. I picked the first one of the season and I took a bite. It was perfect. I rang the bell. And I knew that whatever came next, I was ready. Bell, if you want to see what Eleanor builds next and how the garden becomes a legacy, hit subscribe and stay tuned. Part 7 is the final chapter, and it's the most beautiful one yet. The summer after Grace died was the hottest anyone could remember. The sun beat down on the garden from dawn until dusk, and the plants drank water like they were trying to outlast the heat. I was in the garden every day, from the time the light hit the tomato leaves until the sky turned purple and the first stars appeared. The diner was busier than ever. Word had spread beyond the town, beyond the county, beyond the state. People came from places I had never heard of. They came to see the garden. They came to eat at Grace's. They came to ring the bell. I served them all. I cooked and cleaned and listened to their stories. Some of them were like me, older women who had been told they were too much. Some of them were younger, just starting out, afraid of the world. Some of them were men, hardened and silent, who would sit at the counter and drink their coffee and leave without saying a word. I didn't judge any of them. I just served them food and listened. And at night, when the diner was closed and the garden was quiet, I walked through the rows and rang the bell. The sound was different now. It was fuller, richer, like it had learned how to sing. Sarah had been living with me for 6 months. She had stopped calling Daniel. She had stopped answering his texts. She had filed for divorce, and the papers were being processed. It was a hard thing to watch. My daughter was going through the same pain I had gone through, but for different reasons. Robert had been taken from me, Sarah was choosing to walk away. "Mom," she said one night, "am I making a mistake?" We were sitting on the bench in the garden. The tomatoes were glowing in the fading light. The bell was in my hand. "Am I making a mistake?" she asked again. I reached over and took her hand. "I don't know," I said. "But I know that staying in a place where you're not valued is always a mistake." She was quiet. Then she nodded. "I wish Dad were here," she said. "I wish he could tell me what to do." I squeezed her hand. "Your father was a good man," I said. "But he wasn't perfect. He had doubts too. He had fears. He had nights where he lay awake and wondered if he was doing the right thing." Sarah looked at me. Really, I said. "He used to tell me that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about being afraid and doing it anyway." Sarah smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. "Dad would have loved this garden," she said. I nodded. "He would have loved it." The fall came. The leaves turned. The garden started to go dormant. But I had already started planning for the next year. More rows. More seeds. More community programs. Mark came back. He brought Jane and David. They walked through the garden and made notes on clipboards. "Eleanor," Mark said, "the foundation wants to give you a grant. A significant grant. It would allow you to expand the garden, build a full-time kitchen, and hire a staff." I looked at him. I looked at the garden. "I don't know if I want to expand," I said. "I don't know if I want to hire people. I like doing it myself." Mark smiled. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. But think about it. This garden could be a model for other communities, other towns, other places where people feel like they don't belong." I thought about it. I thought about the women like me, the veterans, the single mothers, the people who had been told they were too much. I thought about Grace. I thought about what she would have wanted. "Okay," I said. "I'll think about it." The court case with Daniel started in the winter. Sarah had been fighting for custody of Ava and Miles for months. Daniel had hired the best lawyers money could buy. His father, Marcus Cole, was funding the whole thing. I watched my daughter walk into that courthouse every day. She was strong. She was steady. She was everything I had raised her to be. But I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. I could see the fear. I could see the weight of everything she was carrying. One night, after a particularly hard day in court, Sarah sat on the bench in the garden and cried. "Mom," she said, "I don't know if I can do this. He's trying to take everything from me. He's trying to take the kids. He's trying to take my life." I sat down beside her. I put my arm around her shoulders. "Sarah," I said, "do you remember what your father used to say?" She looked at me through her tears. "He used to say that the only thing that can really break you is giving up. As long as you keep going, you're still in the fight." She wiped her eyes. "I keep going. But I'm so tired." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the bell. I put it in her hand. "Ring it," I said. She looked at me. "What ring it?" I said. "It calls back the parts of yourself you lost. Ring it, and remind yourself who you are." Sarah looked at the bell. It was chipped and faded, but it was still beautiful. She rang it. The sound was clear and bright. "I can do this," she said. "I can do this." "Of course you can," I said. "You're my daughter." Sarah won the custody case. She didn't get everything she wanted, but she got enough. She got joint custody. She got visitation rights. She got the respect she had been denied. Daniel was furious. He threatened to appeal. Marcus Cole threatened to sue. But Sarah didn't back down. She stood in front of them and told them she would fight as long as it took. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I'm going to be a mother to my children. And you can't stop me." I watched her stand there. I watched her shoulders straighten. I watched her become the woman she was always meant to be. The next spring, Marcus Cole came to the garden. He didn't come with lawyers. He didn't come with threats. He came alone. I was standing in the middle of the rows, watering the tomato plants. I saw him walk through the gate. He was wearing a jacket and jeans. He looked older than I remembered. "Eleanor," he said, "I need to talk to you." I put down the watering can. I didn't reach for the bell. I didn't need to. "Talk," I said. He took a breath. He looked at the garden. He looked at the plants and the benches and the sign Trina's kids had painted. "I'm not going to fight you anymore," he said. I've lost. I know I've lost. The city council isn't going to approve the sale. The people of this town don't want a parking garage. They want this. I looked at him. He wasn't the same man who had stood in the courtroom. He was smaller somehow. Weaker. Why are you telling me this? I asked. He looked at the ground. I've spent my whole life trying to take things from people, he said. Land. Businesses. Homes. I thought that was winning. I thought that was success. But I look at what you've built, and I realize I've never built anything. I've only taken. I didn't say anything. I waited. Daniel and I haven't spoken in months, he continued. He's bitter. Angry. He's become the kind of man I taught him to be. And I'm ashamed of him. I'm ashamed of myself. I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't pity. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something else. Something like understanding. Marcus, I said. What do you want from me? He looked at me. His eyes were wet. Nothing, he said. I just wanted you to know that you won. Not because you beat me. Because you built something I couldn't tear down. He turned and walked away. I watched him go. The gate swung shut behind him. I stood there for a long time. The sun was warm. The plants were growing. The bell was in my pocket. I didn't ring it. I didn't need to. That summer we had the first harvest festival. The whole town came. Frank built a stage. Rosa cooked. Trina organized games for the kids. Tim made a speech about what the garden meant to him. I stood at the edge of the crowd and watched. Sarah was there with Ava and Miles. They were eating tomatoes and laughing. The kids were running through the rows, chasing each other. Grace's bell was hanging from a post near the entrance. People rang it as they came in. The sound was constant, like a heartbeat. I walked over to the bell. I touched it. It was warm from the sun. Grace, I said. Look what we built. The tomatoes were the best they had ever been. Deep red, thick-skinned, sweeter than anything I had ever tasted. I harvested them every morning and put them in the kitchen. I made tomato soup. I made tomato sauce. I made tomato salad. I sold everything I made. People came from miles away just to taste my tomatoes. But I didn't stop there. I started a seed library. I started a cooking school. I started a community program for veterans. The garden became more than a garden. It became a movement. And at the center of it all was the bell. It was chipped. It was faded. It had been through more than any bell should have to endure. But it still rang. One night, I was sitting on the bench in the garden. The sun was going down. The air was cool. The bell was quiet. Sarah came out and sat beside me. Mom, she said. I'm thinking about something. What? I asked. I want to open a bakery, she said. I want to sell the things I've been learning to make. The cookies. The pies. The bread. I looked at her. She was beaming. She had dirt on her apron. She had flour on her hands. That's wonderful, I said. What made you decide? She smiled. It was the smile she had when she was a little girl, when she had just done something she was proud of. Because I learned from the best, she said. You taught me that building something is the best way to heal. I reached over and took her hand. Then build something, I said. And I'll be right here to help you. The years passed. The garden grew. The diner stayed open. Sarah opened her bakery. She called it Mimi's after the name the grandchildren had given me. Ava and Miles grew up in the garden. They learned to plant and harvest and cook. They learned to ring the bell. I got older. My hands ached. My knees were sore. But I still worked every day. Because I loved it. Because it was mine. Grace had been gone for 5 years. Robert had been gone for almost 25. But I still felt them. In the garden. In the bell. In the food I cooked. They were part of me. And I was part of them. One day, when I was 70 years old, I was standing in the garden. The tomatoes were ripe. The sun was warm. The bell was singing. Ava came running up to me. She was 12 years old now. She had her father's eyes and her mother's smile. Mimi, she said. Can I ring the bell? I smiled. I knelt down beside her. Of course you can, I said. But do you know what the bell is for? She nodded. She had heard the story 100 times. It calls back the parts of yourself you lost, she said. I nodded. Then ring it, I said. Ava reached up and rang the bell. It sang clear and bright. It echoed across the garden and up into the sky. I stood there and watched her. My granddaughter. The daughter of my daughter. The next generation. The bell had called me back from the dead. It had called my daughter back from the edge. And now it was calling Ava forward. The tomatoes were ready again. I picked one and took a bite. It was perfect, sweet and warm. I looked at the garden. I looked at the people who had come to help. I looked at my daughter and my grandchildren. I looked at the bell hanging from the post. That everything I had built was still there. It was bigger than me now. It would outlast me. And that was enough. That was more than enough. There is a bell in the garden. Sometimes when the wind blows, it rings on its own. People say it's grace. I think it's just love doing what love does. It calls back everything you thought you lost. It calls forward everything you're afraid to become. And it reminds you that the greatest revenge isn't taking something from someone who hurt you. It's building something they can never touch. If you've ever felt like you were too much for the world to handle, comment, I stay. A bell to make sure you don't miss the next story in this series. Hit that subscribe button if this story made you believe that it's never too late to start over. Drop a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and follow for more. Because the world needs more people who refuse to disappear.